I was halfway through unloading groceries from the back of my truck when a voice I'd hoped I wouldn't hear for at least another month cut through the pine-scented air. Well, well, if it isn't the sheriff playing Mountain Man. I turned, arms full of canned beans and coffee, to see Odessa Riggs, president of the Bear Creek Lakeview HOA, marching up my gravel driveway like she owned it. Her bleach blonde bob bounced with every step, and she had that signature clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. "Odessa," I said flatly, "didn't expect company at the cabin." "This cabin," she said, jabbing a finger toward the cedar porch, "is technically within Lakeview's border now." "You missed the last meeting." "I'm not in your HOA," I said, setting the groceries down on the porch. "This cabin's been in my family since the 60s, and that annexation claim won't hold up. County records say otherwise." She ignored me and waved over her son, a lanky teenager in a designer hoodie who looked like he hadn't seen the inside of a school in weeks. "Marshall," she said, "go help yourself to whatever's in that truck. Sheriff probably has extra." "Wait, what?" I said, stepping between the kid and my tailgate. "He's not taking anything. These are my groceries." Odessa crossed her arms. "We're just trying to encourage sharing within the community. It's a HOA initiative." "You wouldn't know since you never attend our meetings." "That's because I'm not part of your HOA," I repeated, slower this time. Marshall, clearly used to getting his way, stomped his foot. "Mom, he has jerky in there." "You're not taking anything from my truck," I said firmly. "Back off." Odessa's eyes narrowed. "You're being aggressive. I'm calling the sheriff." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" She whipped out her phone and started dialing, muttering something about trespassing and intimidation. I reached over and pulled my badge out of my jacket pocket, holding it up. "I am the sheriff." She froze mid-dial, staring at the badge like it had just slapped her. "You're bluffing. Try me." She didn't get a chance. A black and white cruiser had just come up the trail, one of my deputies, Nolan, doing his usual weekend patrols. He stepped out, saw me, Odessa, and the kid, and came over. "Everything all right here, Sheriff Briggs?" Odessa's face went pale. "Just a misunderstanding," I said, looking right at her. Apparently Odessa here thought she could send her kid to steal food from my truck because her HOA suddenly thinks they run this land. Nolan nodded slowly. "Funny, county records still show this property as private and not under HOA jurisdiction." Odessa floundered. We filed new documents. "Expanding the HOA to include these lots, without a vote?" I asked. "Without owner consent, that's illegal." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'm going to need a copy of those documents," I said, "and Odessa, don't send your kid over here again. Next time, it won't be just a warning." Odessa yanked Marshall by the arm and stormed off, but not before turning back and yelling, "This isn't over." "You're right," I said. "It's just getting started." The next morning, I woke to the sound of shovels scraping gravel outside. I hadn't asked anyone to do maintenance, so I threw on a flannel and boots and walked out to find two men in neon vests digging a shallow trench across the edge of my driveway. "Morning," I said, stepping off the porch. "Mind telling me what you're doing on private property?" One of the workers looked up, clearly uncomfortable. "Just following work orders. HOA said to install a boundary marker, some kind of perimeter stake." I scanned the area. They'd already carved a crooked line through my side yard, running dangerously close to the water line and my dog's buried electric fence. "Stop what you're doing," I said, pulling out my phone. "You're trespassing, and you're operating without a permit." The guy hesitated, then dropped his shovel. "We didn't know. We were told this was common ground now." "It's not," I said, dialing the county zoning office. "And unless you want to be part of a lawsuit, I suggest you pack it up." They didn't argue. Within minutes, they were loading their tools back into a rusted utility truck. I got the name of the contracting company, Hollow Ridge Services, and called the number on the side. The owner, a guy named Milt, apologized profusely and admitted the work order came from a woman named Odessa Riggs, who claimed to be acting on behalf of the HOA and said the property had recently been annexed. "No paperwork to back that up?" I asked. "None we've seen," Milt said. "She said it was approved internally." "Internally doesn't cut it," I said, hanging up. Back inside, I opened up my laptop and pulled the county GIS map. Sure enough, my lot lines hadn't changed since 1983. I also found the HOA's charter online public domain, since they'd filed it through the county clerk's office last year when they expanded into Phase 3. Nowhere did it mention power to forcibly annex non-member parcels. The only way they could expand was through unanimous votes of affected homeowners, which hadn't happened. I printed everything. Then I dug into Odessa's background. I already knew she'd been elected HOA president after the last guy quit mid-meeting 2 years ago. Figured it wasn't voluntary. She'd since rewritten half the bylaws, installed her brother-in-law as treasurer, and passed a series of community beautification ordinances that conveniently forced residents to buy services from her cousin's landscaping company. Something wasn't just off, it stank. I drove down into town and stopped by the clerk's office. Miss Paxton, who'd worked there longer than I'd been alive, handed me a copy of every filing the HOA had made in the last 18 months. Most were boilerplate meeting minutes, budget reports, permit requests, but one caught my eye. A map stamped last week, showing an updated jurisdictional boundary for the HOA. It included my cabin, but it was missing 2 things: a homeowner consent form and a county signature. Who approved this? I asked. No one, Paxton said, squinting at the stamp. That's not our seal. That's a scanned copy stuck on with a PDF editor. See the shadowing around the edge? It's not even aligned. She was right. It was a forgery. I folded the map and slid it into a folder. Mind if I borrow this? Take it, she said, already pulling out the office scanner. And I'll make sure the DA gets a copy too. On the way back up the ridge, I passed Nolan's cruiser parked at the base of Odessa's cul-de-sac. I stopped, rolled down the window. Need a favor, I said. Got evidence of document fraud. Odessa's forging county stamps to push annexations. Nolan's eyebrows lifted. You want to bring her in? Not yet, I said. I want to see how deep this goes first. Back at the cabin, I installed a new trail cam in the woods facing the driveway. Not for wildlife, though the bears had been active lately, but to keep an eye on anyone else who thought they could walk in and start digging up my land. By late afternoon, I had a visitor. Not Odessa this time, but her treasurer Walt, a balding man who always wore pressed khakis and spoke like he was auditioning for a mortgage commercial. I thought we should talk, he said, hands folded behind his back. Privately. Talk, I said, keeping the door open. He offered a tight smile. There's a lot of confusion about boundaries lately. Understandable with the new overlay maps. There's no confusion, I said. There's fraud, and I've got the proof. His smile didn't budge. We'd prefer to resolve this without involving outside parties, perhaps a compromise, maybe. Honorary membership for your cabin. No dues, of course, just a gesture. You offering me a bribe? Of course not, he said quickly. Just trying to avoid unnecessary escalation. It's better for everyone if we work together. I stepped out onto the porch. Tell Odessa I don't negotiate with people who forge county documents. And if I see one more contractor, surveyor, or clipboard jockey on my land, I'll file criminal trespass charges. You got that? He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead gave a stiff nod and backed down the steps. That night, I reviewed the trail cam footage. Nothing unusual until around midnight. A pair of flashlights popped up near the edge of the woods, right where the trench had been. 2 figures, one short, one taller. They moved slow, careful. The taller one held what looked like a measuring tape. The short one barked instructions. I zoomed in. Odessa and Marshall. They stayed for 20 minutes, then disappeared back into the trees. I emailed the footage to my work account, then forwarded it to Nolan with one line. We're filing tomorrow. The next morning, I called the DA's office and handed over everything: the forged map, the boundary scheme, the trail cam footage. By noon, a warrant was signed. Odessa was arrested that evening for falsifying public documents, attempted property annexation without consent, and unauthorized use of county identifiers. Marshall wasn't charged, he was a minor, but the DA made it clear he'd be subpoenaed as a witness. The fallout came fast. The HOA board tried to close ranks, but with the treasurer and president both under investigation, their power crumbled. Homeowners who'd been bullied for years suddenly found their voices. A dozen filed independent complaints. One woman even brought receipts showing how Odessa had funneled HOA dues into a private account. The DA's office opened a formal investigation into the entire HOA leadership. County auditors stepped in, and the board was suspended indefinitely. A temporary administrator was assigned someone from outside the community. And me, I finally got to unload groceries in peace. By the end of the week, Bear Creek Ridge felt like it had shed its skin. The HOA's temporary administrator, a no-nonsense woman named Briggs from the County Regulatory Board, wasted no time. She held an emergency town hall in the community center, and word of Odessa's arrest had already spread like wildfire. People who'd been too afraid to speak up before were now practically elbowing each other for a chance to get to the microphone. I sat in the back, arms crossed, listening. Lewin wasn't there to play therapist, she was there to document violations and collect evidence. Every time a resident stood and recounted shady fines, unapproved landscaping fees, or mysteriously vanishing maintenance budgets, she nodded once, jotted a note, and held up a voice recorder. When it was over, she turned to the crowd. This is no longer about late mowing fees or mailbox colors. What's been happening here is fraudulent, coercive, and potentially criminal. I'll be filing a preliminary report to the district attorney's office by Monday. Anyone with supporting documents, contracts, or payment records, bring them to me. There were no questions. Just the sound of chairs scraping as people rushed to get their papers. As I stepped outside into the cooling dusk, Lewin caught up to me. "Sheriff Briggs," she said, glancing at my badge. "Didn't expect to find you at the center of all this." "I didn't expect to be," I said. "But I'm not surprised by how far it went. Odessa may be the face of it," she said, "but she wasn't working alone. Her brother-in-law, the treasurer, he's already trying to cut a deal, said he has proof of wire transfers to a dummy corporation. Who owns the shell?" Her eyes narrowed. "That's what we're tracing, but there's a name that keeps popping up. Howard Nix. Ring a bell," I stiffened. "He used to run zoning in the next county over, got fired 6 years ago for misplacing permit applications. He's been serving as a consultant here," she said. "No official title, but we found emails between him and Odessa on a private server. If we can tie him to the forged boundary map, that's conspiracy to commit fraud." "You'll need a search warrant," I said, "and a full forensic team." "Already in motion," Lewin said. "We've got probable cause." The next morning, I joined Nalan and 2 county investigators as they executed the warrant at Odessa's house. It was a 2-story colonial at the end of a cul-de-sac, all white trim and artificial flower beds. Marshall's bike was tipped over in the front yard, its back wheels still slowly turning. Odessa wasn't home. She was out on bail, and according to Nalan's dispatch, had already retained a lawyer from Downstate 1 with a reputation for defending corporate embezzlers. Inside, we found exactly what we needed. In a locked drawer of her office desk, beneath a stack of HOA newsletters, were 2 laptops. One was encrypted, the other wasn't. The unencrypted one had a folder labeled Community Planning. Inside were drafts of boundary maps with version numbers and a spreadsheet titled Adjustments for Compliance. It listed parcel numbers mine included next to checkboxes labeled Acquired, Pending, and Resistance. "Resistance," Nalan muttered, flipping through the tabs. They were tracking homeowners who pushed back. "More than that," I said, pointing to another column. "Look at these dates. They line up with fake violation notices." They were targeting people who challenged them. In a separate folder titled Consulting, we found scanned invoices from HN Solutions LLC, Howard Nix's shell company. Each one billed the HOA for jurisdictional review, boundary extension strategy, and compliance mapping. All signed electronically, all dated within the last 6 months. The real clincher came from the encrypted laptop. The forensic tech with us cracked it in less than 10 minutes using a local admin exploit. The desktop background was a photo of a luxury speedboat docked at a marina with the words Charter, the Future scrawled across the hull. "I guess HOA dues really do pay for lifestyle upgrades," I said. Inside a folder named Legacy Projects, we found PDFs of falsified county stamps, complete with layered Photoshop files showing how they'd been digitally applied. There were also audio recordings. One file, labeled Nix Call 3, was particularly damning. It played out like a mob deal. Odessa, if they don't agree, we file the map anyway. Nix, you'll need to make it look legitimate. Use the overlay I sent. Odessa, I'll scan the old stamp. No one looks twice at those. Nix, and the sheriff, Odessa, he lives too far up the ridge, doesn't attend meetings. We'll box him in before he notices. I handed the headphones to the lead investigator. That's conspiracy, forgery, and attempt to defraud a public official. You've got everything you need, he nodded. We'll bring this to the DA before the day's out. By the weekend, the DA's office had filed a second round of charges. This time they included conspiracy, wire fraud, and obstruction of official zoning procedures. A federal audit was pending, since some of the HOA funds had been traced to interstate accounts. Residents began demanding a full HOA dissolution, a rare but legal process that required a 2/3 vote. A petition circulated fast. By Sunday afternoon, it had passed the threshold. Luann called an emergency meeting to oversee the vote. On the ballot, dissolve Bear Creek Lakeview HOA and transfer administrative control to the county until a new oversight committee could be formed. The vote passed with 86% in favor. The next day, county surveyors arrived to remove every illegal boundary marker and restore original property lines. Signs bearing the HOA logo were pulled down. The security cameras Odessa had installed at the neighborhood entrance without consent were dismantled and boxed up for evidence. I finally got a call from the county commissioner. You've stirred up quite the hornet's nest, he said. But you did it by the book. We're putting your name forward for oversight committee liaison. I'd rather not, I said. I'm better at cleaning up messes than writing bylaws, he laughed. Still, you've got community support. That cabin of yours might be the safest place in the county now. Later that week, I was stacking firewood when a man in his early 50s pulled up in a dusty van labeled Milt's Utility and Survey. I recognized him from earlier. Milt stepped out, wiping his hands on his jeans. Just came to apologize in person, he said. Didn't know we were being used. Reckon it's my fault for not checking deeper. You stopped when I asked. That's more than most, I said. He nodded toward the woods. Word is, you're the reason this place is breathing easy again. Just did my job. Well, he said, reaching into the van, maybe this will help you keep doing it. He handed me a roll of new trail cam footage. Caught someone sneaking around your property again last night, not Odessa. This time it was Nix. I took the footage inside. On it, clear as daylight, was Howard Nix, creeping along the tree line with a duffel bag. He stopped at the trench site, dug for 2 minutes, then walked off, leaving something buried. We returned with a warrant and unearthed the bag. Inside were flash drives, dozens of them. Password protected, labeled with phrases like alt ledgers, phase 2 expansion, and NDA clients. The bag also contained a burner phone and a typed letter addressed to future board members, outlining instructions for continuing the annexation plan without drawing county attention. We submitted the evidence to the DA immediately, and within 24 hours, Nix was arrested 2 counties over. He'd been preparing to leave the state. The federal prosecutor took over from there. By the time spring rolled around, Bear Creek Ridge was rebuilding itself, free of the HOA's grip. Neighbors started talking again. Kids rode their bikes without being followed by clipboard-carrying volunteers. People painted their mailboxes whatever color they wanted, and me. I finally rebuilt the old porch swing my grandfather had carved back in the 70s, the one Odessa once said didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. It squeaked a little, but I liked it that way. The final nail came from a place no one expected. A dusty cardboard box unearthed in the back of the community center's storage closet. 2 weeks had passed since Nix was hauled off in cuffs, and while most of Bear Creek Ridge was busy reclaiming their front lawns and repainting their garages in colors outside Odessa's old palette guidelines, I was sitting in the temporary HOA office reviewing evidence the county still needed cataloged. That's when Luann walked in, holding the box like it had teeth. Found it behind a stack of fake architectural review forms, she said, setting it on the table. Dated at least 5 years back. Look at the label, written in faded marker. Original Lakeview expansion plan drafts. I pulled the lid off and immediately saw they weren't drafts. They were minutes from secret meetings, handwritten notes, old mailers never sent, and at the bottom, a spiral-bound notebook with the initials OR. In gold ink, Odessa Riggs had kept a personal log. I peeled it open to the first page. The writing was rushed, full of cross-outs and underlines, but one entry near the middle stopped me cold. Howard says if we use the matching parcel numbers and tweak the overlay, no one will notice. We can reassign utility access and block Ridge properties from county services, make them dependent, force them in. Luann leaned over my shoulder. She was planning to cut utilities. Worse, I said, flipping to the next few entries. Odessa had drafted a phased control plan. After annexation, properties like mine would be reclassified under HOA zoning. Once that happened, they'd be subject to new utility contracts privately managed with inflated rates. No public oversight. And she'd already signed a preliminary contract with a third-party utility company registered in Nevada. Luann picked up her phone. Get the DA and the State Utility Commission on the line. We're not looking at residential bullying anymore, we're talking about infrastructure fraud. Within 48 hours, state investigators were on scene. They brought in analysts from the Office of Utility Oversight, and by the end of the day, they'd confirmed Odessa and Nix had quietly filed paperwork months before to reroute service agreements that would have stripped Ridge homeowners of their county, provided water and electricity. It hadn't gone through only because they lacked one final signature, mine. The plan had been to wear me down, box me in, isolate the last holdout until I gave up. But now, with the notebook, they had enough to indict Odessa on felony conspiracy to defraud the state and attempted unlawful seizure of public infrastructure. Luann turned to me as the investigators filed out. She's going away for a long time. The trial began 3 weeks later in the county courthouse. It wasn't high profile, at least, not for the outside world, but every seat in the gallery was filled with Ridge residents. Some brought folders of evidence. Others brought lawn chairs and coolers, treating it like a local sporting event. Odessa sat at the defense table, her hair darker now, her posture stiffer. She didn't look at anyone, not even Marshall, who sat silently in the back next to a court-appointed guardian. The prosecutor, a wiry woman named Delaney with a voice like a buzzsaw, didn't waste time. This case, she began, is not about a bad president. It is about a deliberate, calculated attempt to create a private fiefdom under the guise of community management. This defendant used fake documents, forged maps, and fraudulent contracts not to improve her neighborhood but to control it. She tried to privatize utilities and forcibly annex land she did not own. Odessa's attorney tried to paint her as misunderstood, overwhelmed, misled by Nix. But when the recordings were played, her voice directing the plan, mocking homeowners and referring to the Ridge as a bunch of ungrateful squatters, the courtroom went silent. Then came the testimony. Luann took the stand first, then the county clerk, then Milt. Each laid out the paper trail, the fake stamps, the altered maps. But it was Marshall's testimony that ended it. He was nervous, hands fidgeting in his lap, but when the judge asked if he understood the gravity of what he was about to say, he nodded once and looked straight at the jury. She told me to distract the sheriff, he said. Said if I could get him away from the truck, she could take a picture of his property line. Said it would help her finish the map. She told me he didn't live here officially. She said he was a problem. The defense barely cross-examined him. In the end, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Odessa was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with parole not eligible for at least 7. Her assets were frozen. The HOA's accounts were dissolved by court order, and restitution was to be paid to every homeowner affected by her schemes. Nix, facing federal conspiracy charges, took a plea deal that included full disclosure of every client he'd ever advised. That list included 4 other HOAs across the state, now under investigation. With the trial over, the county assumed full administrative control of the Ridge. A new community council was formed, not an HOA, but a volunteer board with no enforcement authority. Just neighbors helping neighbors. Luann stayed on a few extra weeks to help with the transition. Before she left, she stopped by my cabin one last time. "You know," she said, leaning against the porch railing, "you prevented something dangerous here. If Odessa had pulled this off, others would have followed. HOAs with a taste for power don't stop on their own." "She didn't count on people pushing back," I said. "She counted on fear," Luann corrected, "and you gave them something else." I nodded but didn't say anything. The sun was setting over the ridge, casting long shadows across the gravel. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. Later that night, I got a knock on the door. It was Marshall. He stood awkwardly, holding a small box. "I found this in the attic," he said. "Thought, maybe you should have it." Inside was a Polaroid. Odessa, back when she first moved in. Smiling, standing beside a Welcome to Bear Creek sign that had long since been replaced. "I think she meant well," he said. "At the start." "Maybe," I said, "but intent doesn't excuse damage." He nodded and turned to go. I let him walk off into the dusk, the box still in my hands. The next morning, I went down to the county office and submitted paperwork to formally deregister my property from any future HOA filings. It wasn't necessary anymore, but I wanted it on record. The cabin was quiet again. No more trench diggers. No more fake fines. No more forged documents or midnight flashlight surveys. Just the sound of wind in the branches and the thump of a split log dropping onto the pile. Justice, in Bear Creek Ridge, had finally come home.